welcome again. Now, a lot of my videos touch upon various different strands and elements of what's going on in society regarding schooling, regarding totalitarian elements, children's education, mental health, and how the schools are being targeted for turning the school into a mental health clinic, so to speak. And then, of course, mentioned a lot of stuff about COVID, the brave new normal, COVID 1984, so to speak, and its mirroring of different historical totalitarian regimes and the tactics of the government at the moment. But let's say this is from an article, and I think this touches on a lot of things I've talked about in past videos. This was sent to me by someone kindly. It's called The National Mental Health Programme, Creating Standards for the New World Order by Dr. Dennis L. Cuddy from America, I believe. It was written in 2004. 2004, yeah. So 16 years ago, 16, 17 years ago. So in his introduction, he quotes the Fabian socialist Bertrand Russell, and Bertrand Russell's book, The Impact of Science on Society, 1953. So Bertrand Russell wrote, open quote, "It is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they now have even in totalitarian countries. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that, after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Diet, injections and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible." Now, this is very pertinent to my videos I've done on the adverse childhood experiences movement and the resilience well-being stuff in schools, and related to this idea of inculcating children with a certain version of mental health, seeing themselves as a machine, their mind as a machine to be manipulated, their mind to be problematized in such a way where their kind of obsessive monitoring of thoughts, feelings, moods, etc., and all those things are regarded as pathological, or can be pathological, and therefore need attention. And the mental health inculcation at the school, a very kind of godless inculcation or education of how one views psyche or the self. And then there's the whole queer theory aspect of it as well. The suggested to children they may be not the sex or gender they think they are. And then, of course, on top of that, the layer of hate crime legislation that they want to push. Because, as Bertrand Russell says here, any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Because what parent will want to speak up if they're going to be hate crime And he goes on to very interesting things in this essay. I just noted a few down. This is a good one. This touches on the idea of the mental health clinic, the school turning into a mental health clinic. It says, unfortunately, American public schools, bought by Dr. Stevenson's reasoning, and increasingly introduced mental health programs in schools across the land in America. The results of these initiatives soon become obvious. In Mental Robots, 1957, by Dr. Lewis A. Allison, former president of the California Medical Association, he declared, Americans today are being deluged with propaganda under the disarmingly innocent title of the Mental Health Programme. Think ACEs, think resilience, think Wellbeing that's in the Scottish schools and similar projects in the UK. Its robotary objectives the ultimate destruction of the human individual as a person, the eradication of all traditions, ideals and moral concepts which he has learned from home, church and school, and taught to deny and reject responsibility for himself, and to transfer that responsibility to the group, that is, the state. The master plan has been the result of thousands of individuals who have not had the time or the ability to gain a perspective of the ultimate aims of the plan, which they have actively aided in bringing to fruition. Summer sessions in group dynamics under the direction of a subdivision of the National Education Association, with the fundamental objective to prepare those so trained in the subtle art of propagandizing without seeming to do so. Here among academic surroundings, a carefully arranged schedule of indoctrination has been prepared by the National Education Association. And of course, with the not so subtle attack on religion, Christianity in the West, in the UK, and inculcating children with purely objectified, technical way of viewing one's experience, and making that a kind of national religion in a way. You know, mental health crises and mental health schemes that are set up that are supposedly so altruistic to protect the well-being and mental health of children go a very long way in indoctrination to young children how to see themselves. And it goes on. The group dynamics mentioned by Dr. Allison related to the Research Centre for Group Dynamics at the University of Michigan and the subdivision of the National Education Association. To which he referred was the National Training Laboratories. The NTL was co-founded by the Research Centre and the NEA's Division of Adult Education Service. In 1962, the NTL published Issues in Human Relations Training, in which the editors wrote that human relations or sensitivity training fits into a context of institutional influence procedures, which includes coercive persuasion in the form of thought reform or brainwashing. The book also includes information about change agent skills and unfreezing, changing and refreezing attitudes. Now, I've mentioned this before. In the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience, infiltration into schools, well-being, resilience, depending what name it's given. They have these resilience classes to get children in a group to discuss their moods, emotions, feelings, fears of their parents, the emotions of their parents, in a group setting, which is essentially a sensitivity group. Because in that, there's a lot of coercion. subtle coercion by the group leader, the teacher, and that there's a huge sense of that the children should be conforming to this, and children feel a lot of pressure to conform to these situations. So it is a form of programming, brainwashing, and inculcating this way of viewing the world. And so he goes on, and this is related more so to the adverse childhood experience movement, with their idea of measuring adverse childhood experiences through questionnaires, the ACE questionnaire. So, the year after Dr. Allison's book appeared, Congress passed the National Defence Education Act, which provided a massive infusion of guidance counsellors and testing personnel into the public schools across the US. And the year after the NTL's book was published, the first governor's school for the gifted and talented in the nation began in 1963 in North Carolina, with funding for the Carnegie Corporation. On May 6, 1963, Professor George Welsh of the Psychology Department of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill wrote to the Psychological Corporation in New York, indicating that at the Governor's School we are planning to administer an extensive test battery. And on May 10th of that year, Harold Seashore, director of the corporation's test division, replied to Professor Wells and indicated that if he used their test, we would want a set of the cards filed with us so that we can accumulate information in groups like this over the years. Of course, this is what's happening in schools. They are very slowly infiltrated into the schools, this ideology of ACEs, of mental health, ism, ACE awareness, the drive for ACE-aware schools, questionnaires, data. And of course, when you collect data, and the named person thing was very much along these lines as well. It's sinister. It's very, very sinister. And of course, this is not done with consent. This is very troublesome because these groups, the sensitivity groups that are happening in schools, where the children get to speak about their emotions, feelings, moods, etc. This is essentially a psychotherapy without consent from the parents or consultation. It's unethical to give children psychotherapy in such a context, and especially without consent. But it's happening. So, this section is called Public School Psychiatric Clinic. The year after this writer attended the first Governor's Council, the National Institute of Mental Health, on February 18, 1964, awarded psychologist B.F. Skinner, who's a very famous behaviourist, a grant for $283,000 to be paid over 10 years and to write Beyond Freedom and Dignity 1971, in which Skinner maintained that concepts of freedom and dignity must be discarded, and that human behaviour be conditioned by an elite. Not long after the publication of Skinner's book, US Representative Cornelius Gallagher delivered a speech in the US House of Representatives titled Skinnerying the Taxpayers, in which he stated, "We disclosed in 1970 that at least 250,000 American grammar school children are receiving behavioral modification drugs, most often the amphetamines or speed, as they are commonly called. Think of ADHD drugs nowadays, which are effectively a stimulant, and they have that effect on children." Later in the 1970s, Psychological Society 1978, Martin Gross was published, in which he informed readers that our schools are taking on the aura of a psychiatric clinic, Without taxpayer consent or parental consent, the school child is immersed in a psychological environment which he is cajoled, invited, seduced, even bludgeoned into seeking counselling. Almost all the school psychology personnel are actually laymen. The entire practice of school psychology may be seen as an intrusion of bureaucracy into the family structure. Further, school counselling may not be legal. Well, it's not legal. In most cases, school personnel may not practice psychotherapy on children. By labelling it as counselling instead of psychotherapy, they may have invented a semantic subterfuge to circumvent the law. There is no real evidence that anxieties, neurosis, or eventual psychosis rate of children is in any way reduced by these school interventions. The same with the ACEs and resilience thing. There's no evidence to suggest it's got improved mental health. There is the equal possibility that the effort is actually a neurotic stimulus. In other words, as I've mentioned in other videos, by schooling and indoctrinating children into the cultural hegemony of mental health, the school is a mental health clinic, you're problematizing their minds. And perhaps it is the ACE awareness and the resilience drive in schools, the mental healthism in schools, is in fact, as I believe it is, a neurotic stimulus to make children mentally disturbed. With our taxes, we are helping poorly trained specialists to tamper with the psyches of an already over-psychologized generation. And we are being over-psychologized, especially the children. A couple more bits. It's a fascinating article. It's a fascinating article. On April 11th, 1933, its president, Max Mason, assured trustees that in their programme, the social sciences will concern themselves with the rationalisation of social control, the control of human behaviour. And in July of the very next year, Willard Givens, Executive Secretary of the National Education Association, 1935 to 52, declared, "A dying laissez-faire must be completely destroyed, and all of us, including the owners, must be subjugated to a large degree of social control. An equitable distribution of income will be sought." The Great Reset. So, in Gibbon's language, if Gibbon's language sounds like communism, that's because it is similar to the economic philosophy being preached in the Soviet Union at the time. And about the same time, before 1936, in the USSR, Lavrentia Beria, head of Stalin's secret police, delivered an address to American students at Lenin University declaring, this is fascinating, this part, "A psychopolitician must recruit and use all the agencies and facilities of mental healing. He must labour to increase the personnel and the facilities of mental healing until at least the entire field of mental science is entirely dominated by communist principles and desires. You must labour until we have dominion over the minds and bodies of every important person in your nation. You will discover that everything will aid you in your campaign to seize control and a use of mental healing to spread our doctrine and rid us of our enemies within your own borders." Wow. So you see where it's going. Indoctrinating children to think and see their minds in a certain way. It's a good way to get rid of future dissidents, along with COVID-1984 Operation Fear. in the schools, queer theory in the schools. We're in troubling times, and this ACE awareness that's being infiltrated into the school system and children's lives is purely an ideological method to indoctrinate. So very, very worrying. Anyhow, onwards and upwards to next time. Take care yourselves. Bye.